Welcome everyone for attending. So pleased to be here. My name is Michelle Bouffard. I am a wine educator, author, journalist, and founder of Tasting Climate Change. Before we start, I would like to share a few housekeeping points. The session will be 90 minutes long. The first 60 minutes will be concentrated over content, and the last 30 minutes will be dedicated to your question. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see a little box that says Q&A. We would ask you to ask those questions during the seminar on the Q&A box. During that time, the Femmes du Vin team will be vetting your question, and at the very end of the seminar, I will be addressing your question. A reminder that you can support Femmes du Vin and donate at any time, and it goes to scholarship. You go to www.femmesduvin.org. If you are on social media and you want to share while we're doing the seminar, we encourage you to do so. The hashtags are the following: Femmes du Vin and New Zealand. So hashtag Femmes du Vin, hashtag NZ Wine. Today, a great topic and a very important one: understanding carbon neutral wines from a New Zealand wine perspective. I would really like to thank Femmes du Vin for making room on your platforms for such an important topic, and also our sponsor, New Zealand Winegrowers. To discuss this with me today, I have four amazing women, each with an impressive background. I'd like to start to introduce Charlotte Reid, General Manager of the New Zealand and Winegrowers. Charlotte, after 10 years as the export manager for Villa Maria Estate, based in Europe and China, she became the general manager at New Zealand Winegrowers in 2019. Her international perspective, of course, allows her to share and help the New Zealand winegrowers to continue to spread that strong message of how sustainability and carbon neutrality is important. Rachel Taulelei, CEO of Kono, former US Trade Commissioner, received many impressive awards. One of them in 2018, she was named Māori Woman Business Leader at the prestigious University of Auckland. She presently sits on the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council. Also, we have Karen Titulaer, Head of Legal Risk and Sustainability at Villa Maria. She worked internationally in strategy, corporate responsibility, and sustainability. She's now been at Villa Maria for almost 3 years. Here, Villa Maria has been a pioneer for sustainability. I would say that Karen has become one of the person in the industry to go to for any question they have regarding sustainability, but also how to mitigate climate change. And finally, the dynamic Alice Rule, founder, owner, winemaker of 362 Winery. At 25 years old, she founded the winery with a dream to accelerate circulation economy in New Zealand. Thank you so much for being there, everyone. Before we start, I would like to share a few facts with you on the planet in general, just to kind of remind us how important this discussion is. I think there's been a lot of discussion in the industry with sustainability, which we'll be touching on. But I think climate change and understanding what it means to adapt and mitigate, it's still not fully understood. In 1945, the planet had 2 billion people. Today, we have 7 billion people with a projection to have 9 billion by 2050. No need to say that our consumption is driving carbon emission and also deforestation, which is about 20%. The question is, how much is enough, right? When will we stop when will we make a change? And I think that often we feel overwhelmed. If we look at the last 19 years, 18 of the hottest year on the planet has been in the last 19 years. So it's impressive. So if we look on the news, we know the drought, we know the fire right now happening in California, we saw the fire in Australia. So I think all the signs are there. My goal today is really to use the leadership of New Zealand and the model they're putting in place to mitigate and adapt to climate change and reduce the carbon footprint so that we can all be inspired. Because I think that often we get worried, we get overwhelmed, we don't know where to start, and we feel like it's an impossible mission. So my goal today is really that we can get inspired by those 4 women and that we can leave with a few actions that we can take with us for a better future. I would like to start with Charlotte. Charlotte, it's impressive. I have much admiration for your government. In May 2019, you declared that you were taking on the responsibility to be carbon neutral by 2050. I don't know any other country who's made such a commitment. And of course, it means that from the wine industry perspective, you need to adapt. As we know, climate change, carbon footprint is part of sustainability. Before we get directly to the program that you're putting in place to get to the goal of being carbon neutral by 2050, can you maybe talk to us a little bit about what does sustainability means? Because it's a word I feel that we use too often and not really understanding the full meaning of it. But I have to say, when I went to New Zealand, I was impressed how it's not just a word, it really is a way of living. I've never felt that so much in a country. So if you could maybe define for us, what is sustainability?
Great. Thank you very much, Michelle. And it's a real privilege to be able to tell the story of New Zealand wine and our efforts in this area. And my answer certainly will be supplemented by Rachel, Karen, and Alice as we go through the session. So, New Zealand and sustainability, they go hand in hand. It's a core principle of how we operate. And here we've been producing wines for not so long in comparison with the rest of the wine producing world. But as we have been developing our wine industry that really launched onto the world stage in the 1980s, we have wanted to tread very lightly on the land. And New Zealand Winegrowers, the industry body for all grape growers and wineries in New Zealand, we set up a system way back in 1997 to carefully manage and assess everything that we put into our wine producing practices. So we're incredibly proud of that system. It's called Sustainable Winegrowing New Zealand, which is a bit of a mouthful, or SWNZ for short. And I know from other peers in the wine producing world, New Zealand is really envied for those steps that we have taken to do that. And it's still very much work in progress where we're learning all the time what that means. And what we at New Zealand Winegrowers are really concentrating on now is to communicate that when we're talking about sustainability, we're not just talking about the environment. I liken it to the three-legged stool, that it's about environment, economy, social well-being, or planet, people, profit, whichever way you want to describe it. But they are all interconnected and interrelated. And so the environment's incredibly important. We're very, very proud of our beautiful country in the South Pacific, our clean, green land, and we want to protect those places for future generations. And we'll talk more about that in the future of the session. And so what we're doing at New Zealand Winegrowers is we are helping our growers, our producers of our wines, with an approach to manage how they produce their wines, because if you don't measure things, you can't manage it. So we've got a few systems like that in place. So I guess to answer your question, yes, the environment is very, very important to tread lightly, but the people in our industry and the ongoing financial sustainability is also very important.
But Charlotte, I have a question for you, because any country that you go to that produce wine, they have an association that says we are sustainable. If you want to be part of it, you can be certified. But I know that your level of certification is now at 96%. How do you get there? What is it that New Zealand has done differently that other countries are clearly not doing, because nobody is as high as this? So why is your method working better or working?
Well, I think as Kiwis, as we call ourselves, we care about, you know, our impact on the planet, and we want to do the right thing. And through communication, through education, this has been going on for a long time now. Since 1997, we've had you know, several decades now to put this in place. But we got there fairly quickly. So we have under those 3 pillars that I talked about before, there are 6 key focus areas, and as I said, people's important, but it's the soil, water, pest and disease, waste, and importantly, climate change. Those are the 3, the 6 areas there. And you know, we're a cool climate. Our famous wines have burst onto the world stage because of their inimitable energy and aromatics and beautiful acidity. So climate change is a risk to our cool climate viticulture, and it's very important that we have had that climate change element recently added into our 6 focus areas. So what we're doing in this area is we are trying to minimise the carbon footprint of our industry, and as you said, you talked about that our government brought in our goal to be carbon neutral by 2050, and so as an industry, we want to get there beforehand.
So how do you feel when, I mean, you know, from the outside, when I heard that news, I was so excited, and it's such a model to follow for any country. But there's a part of also panic. How has a New Zealand wine growers, we can, you know, we can help producer to get there? Is it half panic, half excitement, or it's just we're gonna get there, we're gonna find, you know, solutions?
Well, education is incredibly important, as I said earlier, and we have a Sustainability Guardians program in New Zealand where we're going to be having peer-to-peer learning of what is best practice. And you know, it's great that we've got a fabulous panel today to talk about their experiences, and you know, they're great role models to follow.
Can you talk? Sorry, go ahead.
No, okay.
I was going to ask, can you talk a little bit about the program that was approved this summer to go ahead and put in place a strategy to help growers and producers to get there?
Yeah, so we have, as I said earlier, our program, our certification program, SWNZ, Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand. We have incorporated into that some climate change measures. So moving forward, we will, we don't have a full set of data yet, but it's going to be really exciting when we do, to be able to report back to industry on how we're tracking, because as I said earlier, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So it's helping us get into that right direction. And also we are now about to be accredited to a system called Titulaer, which I know that Karen will talk about later in her session. And so they're going to prepare a report for us of where we're at now and where we need to get to in the future. And that will be clearly communicated out to industry. So we as the industry body are helping our industry understand where are we at, what are we doing really well, what areas do we need to work on further. And I know that Karen is leading in that area with what they're doing at Villa Maria, and she can talk on that more. But we're identifying areas where we can adapt to climate change, and also ways that we can mitigate as well.
Great. I'll come back to you, Charlotte, with some questions. We'll move on to the other speaker, and we'll be back. Thank you. Rachel, thank you so much for being there. And I'm really thrilled as Charlotte was saying, sustainability is so much more. People, when they, in the wine industry at least, when people think of sustainability, they think of what do we do in the vineyard and maybe what we do in the winery. But often we don't think about the economical side of things, but most importantly, people. And you know, when you go to your website, I love, there's in big capital letter, there's nothing more important than people. And I think that it's been a big topic all over the world, even more so in the last year, how diversity in workplace is important. But I have to say again, New Zealand, in my perspective anyway, from an outsider going to visit, feels like you've always been a little bit ahead of the curve. I remember going there in 2007 and looking how the Maori culture was really, really integrated, and it was just part of what New Zealand is. And also in the workforce, I found that everything was very much integrated. Can you maybe share with us what your company has been doing to include diversity in your company?
Tēnā koutou katoa, tēnei te mihi mai o haki a koutou katoa I tēnei rā. Thank you, Michelle. Thanks for
I love it.
Such good love. I don't want to say too much because I want to hear from Alice and Charlotte and Karen. So thank you. Yeah, diversity is one of those things that's very important to us. But let me start by saying that we might be kind of our face of diversity within the New Zealand wine story, because we are a Māori company. And we are perhaps notable for a couple of things, but one of them is being Māori, being the first Māori wine company in the world. But let's talk about New Zealand specifically. And Māori, for those who don't know, are the Indigenous people of New Zealand. So there's not a lot in the New Zealand wine industry, and so for that fact, in and of itself, there's a diversity factor by default almost. Which is fantastic. And I guess we can only be the people that we are, and I can only talk to you about our perspective on what that means to us. I think you're right in the New Zealand, economy and workforce and so forth. It might appear that there is a great amount of integration and diversity. And I actually think relative maybe to other countries, that is the case. But I also would acknowledge and would want to be so naive as to present a face of our industry that would say there's not a heck of a lot of work to be done. So I sit on the New Zealand Wine Board, which I love. It's one of the smartest boards that I sit on, and I'm the only woman on there. But what's super encouraging is that we've just been through a round of elections, and we had 5 women who presented themselves for nomination, and 2 of them have made it through. So there are relative leaps and bounds that are being made, and I think that makes all the difference in the world to the conversation in and around New Zealand wine and what we do and how we do it and why we do it. So I'm really encouraged by that. So diversity, you'll never get any kind of argument from me about its importance and its role in making sure that we are getting different voices and different sentiments and different contributions around the table. Maybe a little bit about who we are will give some context to my position on sustainability. So Kono, as I said, is a Māori food and beverage company. So we have a number of different strands. We're involved in seafood, in wine, in horticulture, and also in the natural snacking market. And we're vertically integrated, so all the way from orchards and water farms through to vineyards and branded packaged products that we send around the world. So there's very little time that any of the seafood or wine products that we create are not in our hands. So there's a great amount of care that goes into their production. And really the joy of what we do is that we get to tell great stories about who we are and where we've come from and what it is to be Māori and what Māori excellence looks like. And so that's a real privilege. We're a family-owned business, and we have 4,000 owner families. And so that is both in equal parts a privilege, but also a great responsibility that we love. Sustainability as a word is a new word, right? That's the point of, I guess, this conversation. It's a new word. What does it mean? It's pretty subjective, and that's not a bad thing, because I think that the minute you try to tightly define something, you instantly date it. So I think we need to leave ourselves open to the idea that sustainability is a word and a concept. It evolves, as does our environment. But for us, really, it is about people and it is about place. And for Māori, those two things are inextricably related. And we don't, that's not a completely foreign concept to everyone. It's just simply the way that we view that relationship. So when the environment is unwell, so too are its people, and vice versa. So you can't separate the two. And our environment or our natural resources for Māori, we view them as our ancestors. So you will have maybe read stories about certain places in New Zealand, the Wanganui River, and soon to be the Taranaki Mountain or Maunga Taranaki, are being personified. So they're being given, status of people, because in our world they are. And so we love and revere them in a way that you might a member of your family. And so there's a very different connection to our natural resources, albeit that we are a commercial enterprise and we, live and exist because of that relationship and what we can do on and with our environment. So it makes you think pretty carefully about how you might invest yourself in that space. So we, as an organisation, have a long-term strategy called Te Pai Tawhiti, which is really loosely means the distant horizon. It's a 500-year strategy, which in essence is more of a behavioural doctrine than it is anything else. And it really talks about understanding what it is to make good decisions now for the benefit of future generations. And we try to term it in the idea of, are you being a good ancestor? So everything you do now, does it make you that good ancestor that you can be proud to be? And so, are you protecting and enhancing your taonga or your treasures for the benefit of future generations? So that's a responsibility. That's just not an act that you do on a daily basis. That's thinking forward into that space. We have 5 intergenerational goals. So it's one thing to say there's a distant horizon, we hope we get there, but who will ever know? We've broken that down to 5, we call them po or pillars, that they all have to work synchronistically in order for us to move forward positively. One is about papa whenua, our footprint. One is about ngā kauhihiko, innovation and excitement, and are you fit for the journey forward? One is about putia, so money, are you financially sustainable? Whānau people, our team and both our owners. And then also taiao, which is the word that we use for the environment. So we have measures in every one of those spaces that are pretty lofty, they're pretty tough, but they move us forward. And then, so it's 500 years, intergenerational goals, and then it's today. And what we are relatively obsessed with today is the idea, is the idea that we have a couple of different tangents. One is named whenua ora. So that's loosely defined as land wellness. And the other is tangata ora, and that's the wellness of our people. So we, it's like peeling an onion. You have to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And whenua ora for us is about water, waste, soil, and climate change, much like Charlotte's reference earlier. Those are the things that we know leverage, I won't say good behavior, but sustainable behavior. And as you said to Charlotte, is it exciting or is it terrifying? Like, it's terrifying, I think, from a person who's trying to run a business profitably and sustainably and internationally, and has all of the same kind of commercial expectations that we have of our businesses. You marry that with the requirement to invest long-term in your activity. And while super exciting because we want to do things in the right way, also, we don't know what we don't know, but that's part of the journey. So our endeavour in this space is to become a tikanga-led, so a traditional knowledge base led regenerative agriculture business. So there's a lot of learnings in there, but that's where we sit. And I guess my final word on, never final, right? So I should never say that because my thinking about all of these sorts of things in these conversations is so much more important than what we do is why we do it. So as people start thinking about their place and their activity against sustainability, the most important part of the equation is why you're doing it. And if you can keep that center of mind and deep in your heart, then everything else becomes pretty, in the scheme of things, straightforward. And I think that as we have done, we start with fairly mainstream models of what it is to be, for instance, regenerative. But then we adapt them and we create frameworks that are authentic to us so they stick. And so people are really at liberty and should really think about building a framework of reference as it pertains to sustainability that works for them, because that's what will make it authentic and that's what will make it stick for them. And no one has all the answers. There's a cost to all of this, but the payback is immense.
I love it. I love when you talk about the ancestor and how sustainability is something that is not stagnant. It changes over the years depending on where we are. And I think it's so important. And also to say, you know, there's so much to be done and what can I do now? And it's one step at a time. And it's something that, you know, I was talking to Karen in a meeting early on, and we're talking about this where you just have to start somewhere, right? And with keeping in mind that you have the ancestor history and they've done a lot of great job to protect our planet. We need to make sure that we keep that going forward. It's great. Thank you so much, Rachel, for sharing that. I think it's fantastic. And I think it's a great leadway to Karen's topic. Karen, at Villa Maria, you've been a pioneer in sustainability. You've been doing amazing work. I was always impressed when I went to New Zealand how everyone respects Villa Maria in the industry, and you know, the small and the big, and the work you've been doing. And when we talk about climate change specifically, we always talk about adaptation, things like grapes you can plant and rootstock and canopy management. And the other part is mitigation. And I find that in the industry, maybe because it's easier for us to understand, we spend a lot of time talking about adaptation, but mitigation is a bit more difficult for people to grasp. What can you do to reduce the carbon footprint? And I know that at Villa Maria, in the last 10 years, you've reduced the carbon footprint by 36%, and you're on track, I believe, to reach your goal of reducing by 50% by 2025. So what I would love for you to share with us is, as a business, because like Rachel was saying, is one step at the time. You cannot do everything at once. And I imagine as a business, you look at where is the carbon emission coming from and where do I go first? And so if you maybe can share with us how what was your strategy to get there and how you moved so quickly by reducing by so much in a short period of time.
Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be a part of this discussion today. And I always find I come away from these discussions, and I've actually learned something as well from other people. And that's the thing. Do you know, you asked before Charlotte if she was terrified or excited, or whether we were terrified or excited. Personally, I'm excited. And I'm excited because when you look at something like carbon emissions, and if I can just be clear, we've reduced it so far by 36% per bottle. And we're aiming for 50% per bottle.
Okay,
yeah.
Per
and
bottle.
That's an important one because Villa Maria it's grown quite significantly in the last couple of decades. So last year we did have our first real drop in carbon emissions, which is great, and that's what we want to keep on going. But with is actually dropping the carbon emissions in real terms. As productivity goes up, it's quite hard to keep them going down. So that's our aim though in the long run. But the reason why I'm excited is, particularly hearing Charlotte and Rachel and what they're saying, is that when you can't separate out people from the environment, and you need to think about well-being of the environment and people, and economic well-being as a part of that. And so I think if you address carbon emissions, and climate change, if you do it in the right way, you're addressing all of those actions all together. So they all interrelate. And I think that's a really important point. So you can come up with some amazing solutions for the environment, but for us as people as well. And to me, that's really exciting. So I'm excited, not terrified yet.
That's good.
In terms of, if I just take you through a little bit of the journey, I always feel slightly a fraud when I talk about Villa Maria's journey, because I've only been with Villa Maria for nearly 3 years, and actually the groundwork for Villa Maria's sustainability journey has been laid sort of decades ago. And Charlotte knows this. She's been a part of that much earlier than I was. So if we start with sustainable wine growing in the 1990s, that's when the decision was made that as an industry, we need to move forward and make sure that we are sustainable. And Villa Maria was one of the founding members there. We also started on the journey of organics over 20 years ago now. And so a decision was made to convert some of our vineyards to organic. And we've actually got a goal for 100% of our vineyards to be organic by 2030. It's a real challenge, that one, but it's teaching us a lot along the way. And there is quite a big link in with climate change mitigation there too, that I'll take you through in a minute. In terms of our carbon emissions, to pick up on Charlotte's point, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so we started measuring our carbon emissions. We made the decision back in 2008 and started measuring them. We got our first full set of data in 2009, and that's been a journey ever since. So we've now got over 10 years of data on our carbon emissions. And we're going through a stage at the moment of actually making our data more robust. And that's really critical, because if you don't have that data, you don't know where to focus your efforts. And so I think that being able to measure your data is really, really important. But if I go back through the journey of Villa Maria and in the last few decades and the sustainability journey that we've been on, a lot of it has been driven by the viticulturalists and by the winemakers, and the passion of a few people who have been incredibly forward-looking and really focused on doing the right thing. We have Sir George Fistonich, who is Villa Maria's founder. He always had a sense of guardianship of the land. And I was laughing when I was hearing Rachel talking about the 500-year view. I mean, that's really something, having that 500-year horizon. We always laugh about Sir George's 50-year horizon, because in business sense, a 50-year horizon is actually a long time for a lot of businesses. A lot of businesses make decisions very short term. Whereas George would always talk about where do we want to be in 50 years time, 500 years, wow, that's really impressive, and I think that's a great view to have. So Sir George always had this strong sense of guardianship of the land, and his nephew Fabian Jukic, who recruited me into Villa Maria, was a real driving sustainability champion for Villa Maria, and did a lot of great work in laying the groundwork in terms of our program. What I realised when I came on board, though, is that to really embed it in everything we do, we needed to bring everyone on the journey with us. We couldn't have a model, and a lot of businesses do this. They have a model of perhaps a sustainability champion and a sustainability committee or steering group. And while I think that can help get things started, I actually think you really need to work hard to make sure everyone is on the journey. And for us, that's our staff. So we need to make sure all of our staff are on the journey. And I think the realization for that came to me when I was in the role perhaps about 6 months, and I had people in our marketing team come to me and say we're sustainable, but we're not really, are we? And I was like, what do you mean? Have you got any idea of all the amazing things that we do? And they didn't know. So we didn't really have it as a program that was embedded throughout our whole business. So that's one of the areas that I'm focusing on, on really empowering all of our people to take us on this journey. Another part of it is our consumers and our customers. And I think Alice will give you some great views later about our consumers and what you can do to really engage them. I've also noticed that a lot of our customers, the people we sell the wine to directly, have really challenged us in the last couple of years to keep on taking that next step along the way. So we have a very strong working relationship with Air New Zealand and with other customers as well. And they have really challenged us, and we've worked in partnership with them, which has been great. Suppliers, absolutely, suppliers for businesses are part of this. They have to be a part of the solution. And a lot of our really good innovations in terms of reducing the impact of our packaging, for example, or reducing the impact of the freight, or the efficiency of our services comes from suppliers. And so we have annual reviews with our suppliers. Our whole process now and our discussions with our suppliers, sustainability is absolutely one of the key pillars that we talk to them about. And I actually made a note down actually in terms of who we engage with as industry. When I was hearing Charlotte speak now, made me realise that actually a big part of our journey for mitigation is how we work as an industry, and we work very collaboratively. So not a week would go by when I don't hear from Sustainable Wine Growing or from one of our other industry members, and we talk all the time and share about what can we do about this packaging waste. What can we do? What's happening with tractors? Are there new options on the horizon? Things like that. So we talk all the time as an industry, and we work very collaboratively together in New Zealand. And I think I've never worked in an industry that's done that's been that collaborative before on this, and I think it's amazing, and we can really achieve a lot together, I think, through that work. But in terms of when I realised that we really needed to make sure everyone was on the journey and it wasn't just a sustainability champion pushing forward, I realised we needed to speak in a language that meant something to people. So we actually, earlier this year, we had approval to use a different language with, so we engaged with our board and our executive team, and we have 4 pillars that we work under. And actually, I think they very much resonate with what Charlotte and Rachel have said so far, and in terms of that they're all interconnected. So our first pillar is respect the land, and that's the fundamental, and that's the starting point with us all the time, is respect the land. And that's about regenerative viticulture, about making sure that we put back into the land, we look after our soil health, we make sure that we don't just take. So respect the land is the fundamental. Tread lightly, so that is the climate change aspect and the mitigation, and I'll take you through in a minute what we do under that one. But that one very much interacts with our other pillars as well, which is invest in people. We have to keep on investing in people, and people are so core. And a lot of what we do is interacting with our community. We try to work with our community to assist young people on their pathway to employment. We focus on economic development of our community and on making sure that we are a New Zealand business that supports other New Zealand businesses. So that's critical to us. And the last pillar is inspire conscious consumers. So that's about the people. We make this amazing quality wine and we make it for our consumers, and we want to inspire them to join us on the journey. So a lot of the things we've been doing have been to tell them how they can join us on the journey. So recycling of our glass bottles, making sure that our consumers can recycle the packaging that we're giving them the wine in. We have done things such as we've had wildflower seeds giveaways to tell our consumers about what we do to increase biodiversity in our vineyards and make sure that they can do the same thing too. So conscious consumers and inspiring our consumers and giving them the information to make good decisions is a core pillar for us. And I think that's something that we'll be focusing on more and more in coming years. So in terms of the mitigation, we are certified by Toitū Carbon Reduce, so that is what we collect the data for. And we have been through a big program of challenging our data and making sure it is robust, and that's what we're going through this year. And that's been quite an eye-opener actually, because I think we realised we were perhaps missing some areas, and having that data is really, really critical for us to be able to make good decisions going forward. So we've been working quite closely with suppliers, and we'll keep on doing that so that we can identify where our big areas of change need to be. And doing that, one of the things we've done is we've actually appointed a sustainable procurement advisor. So we've appointed someone who is, the focus of her role is to work with our suppliers on our sustainability journey. And I think that's going to take us forward a huge amount. In terms of the areas that, if I just give you some of the feel for some of the things that we've focused on in the last few years and where we've managed to make a change, and then I'll tell you my big challenges in the hope that someone can help with them. So energy efficiency has been a big one for us. Now, New Zealand is in a fantastic place that we have around about 85% of our energy, our electricity at any time is from renewable sources. That's great, but it's not 100% yet. So we still need to focus on energy efficiency. And we've managed to reduce our electricity use in our wineries by around about 29–30% in the time that we've been measuring it. And that's fantastic. That's a great result. We've moved to things saying that we've actually increased our electricity use through electric forklifts. So all of our forklifts in our warehouse in Auckland are all electric, and we're moving to electric forklifts throughout New Zealand. And that means that we're no longer using diesel for those forklifts, which is a big win, or other fossil fuels. We've reduced the weight of our bottles. Now, this is a big one because our glass bottles are the biggest source of carbon emissions for us. So a few years ago, we worked with our supplier and we asked them to work to see what they could do to reduce the weight of our bottles. And we managed to reduce them by about 16%, which is huge. That's not just in the actual glass itself, but that's 16% less weight that gets transported around. So that means that when they're transported, they're much more efficient in terms of that weight as well. And we're continuing to work with our supplier. So we work with a New Zealand glass manufacturer, and we work the whole circle with them. So I'm on the glass packaging forum, and we commit to that on a voluntary basis. And that means that we make sure that glass in New Zealand is recycled and made into glass again. So we're part of that whole circular motion. So our glass bottles, the glass bottles that are produced in New Zealand are at least 69% recycled material, which is actually really high, which is great. And so working closely with that supplier, we've managed to achieve that, and we're continuing on that journey. So every year we're increasing the amount of recycled glass, and we're continuing to put pressure on them to innovate and to continue to reduce the weight of those glass bottles.
Karen, I just want to say something about that. I think this is such an important thing, because I find that with consumer, I don't know about in New Zealand, but I find in general in the world, there's so much education yet to be done, because there's a lot of consumer still associate weight bottle with quality.
Absolutely.
And often producers use that as an excuse. You're not, obviously, but it was interesting because I was reading a research recently, and they did a research with consumer showing that at the end, the height of the bottle had more to do with the decision than the weight.
Interesting.
So I just want to say that to encourage other people to follow you, because really it's not true that people won't buy the bottle because it's lighter. So thank you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. And if you go back to screw caps, when New Zealand really championed the screw caps, there was a perception about quality, but actually it was the best thing to do for both the quality and sustainability. And it's the same thing with the weight. There's this perception that you need this heavier bottle. The height one is interesting, actually. I might need to find that research, because we are looking at alternatives for even lighter weight bottles. Now, obviously, when you're talking about glass, you've got to be careful about safety. So it can't go too lightweight, because otherwise it won't be safe. So there's that balancing act. But one of the options we were looking at was a slightly shorter bottle, but it was lower in weight. So I think what we're talking about here is actually about educating consumers so that they understand, so that they can make the right decisions. That's quite a challenge sometimes, because we're competing for space on the shelf when people buy their products. But I think forums such as this one is a great way to get that education and that message out there. Absolutely. Lighter weight bottles has got nothing to do with quality, but it's got a lot to do with sustainability. And on that one, actually, I was talking about the weight with the transport. One of the other things we've done is we've moved to, as we're distributing our product around New Zealand, is more shipping and more rail rather than road. Obviously, when it goes across to our wine goes to Canada, it has to go on shipping. The shipping is one of the more fuel efficient ways of transport. And the New Zealand government has signed up to an international movement to actually make shipping more carbon friendly as well, which is great to see. So, and actually on that fuel, while we're talking about the fuel side of things, some of our really big movement has come from fuel efficient fleet. So making sure that we buy the best cars that we can, making sure that our tractors are as fuel efficient as they can be, and making sure that they're in good condition. So that's where we've actually saved quite a lot of carbon emissions. But talking about that interrelationship with economic sustainability and environmental, that's a great thing for the business. So I actually find that all of the things that we have done to reduce our carbon emissions and mitigate climate change actually generally are good things for the business as well. Some of them might require a higher upfront cost, but in the long run, they're actually saving money. So a lot of it is about efficiency.
And Karen, can I just interrupt a little bit? We had a little catch up yesterday, and everything that you're talking about now, it's all very interrelated. But I was researching you, Michelle, in advance of this, and I saw you were interviewed a little while ago, and you were saying in the video online, you know, in Canada, if we're really trying to be more conscious about the wines and where we buy them, you know, is it right for us, especially with a bit of a buy local movement, is it right for us to buy wines from New Zealand, all that way away? You know, this notion of food miles has sort of reared its head again in recent times. So it's a really important concept, and I think sometimes it mistakenly is interchanged with the notion of sustainability, but it really only looks at the freight part of it. It doesn't go back to looking at the cost of production, and Karen has spoken about our high percentage of hydroelectric power and renewable energy used in New Zealand. But I just wanted to quickly interject there because it's quite a complex topic, but our team have created a really amazing one-pager. Maybe you can put it into the chat later on the New Zealand Winegrowers website under sustainability. It's just there because it's so topical, and we just want to assure the world and consumers, in line with what Karen has been saying, is that we have addressed those areas, and with our regenerative and renewable practices, it is actually a very efficient way to get wines to market. So didn't mean to interrupt, Karen, but I just wanted to...
No, I think that's great. So
we put it all on the page.
Yeah, we were talking about that one yesterday. And do you know what? It's really tough for consumers because they're trying to make the right decisions. And what's hard for them is to get the information to make the right decisions can be really hard. And that's why I think it's great that New Zealand winegrowers have done that work to assure them about, you know, while the wine is being shipped to them, it's being shipped from a place that is really taking climate change seriously and mitigating climate change and has a lot of efficiencies built into the system. So thanks, Charlotte. I think that's great work. And actually, one of the other things that Charlotte and I were talking about yesterday was regenerative viticulture. And this is a movement, it's really interesting. It's a movement that's coming out of North America, actually, and I've been following it very closely because it's very aligned with what we already do. And what's interesting, I think, is that it's been perceived to be different from climate change mitigation. So often when people talk about climate change mitigation, they think about the fossil fuels, reducing the reliance on petrol or diesel or oil. And that's really important. But I very strongly believe that regenerative viticulture has a huge part to play in climate change mitigation. The problem is it's not currently measured or measurable. So we don't have a science to say, if we look after our soil, so to give people a feel for what regenerative viticulture is about, it means really looking after the health of your ecosystem, your soil in particular, your water, and when you're looking after your grapevines, that you're putting back into those systems. So it's not just about extracting, it's about making sure that you're keeping them live and healthy. And one of the quotes that I use a lot when I'm talking to people and taking them around our vineyards is that every tablespoon of healthy soil has more microbes in it than people on earth.
It's amazing.
And a lot of people think, wow, you know, our soil is alive and it should be alive. And when it's alive and well, it's actually taking in carbon from the atmosphere. So it's a really great way to sequester carbon. And so if we look after our soils, and we have a huge issue around the world at the moment with our soil degradation, the United Nations believe that we've only got 60 harvests left, given our current means of farming, 60 years of harvest left in the world. So we really need to look after our soils. And if we do that, we will also be looking after climate change, and we will be managing our climate and reducing the amount of carbon emissions that we have in the air. The issue is with a lot of the certifications. So we have Toitu, carbon reduce. It doesn't currently recognise that, and that's because the science isn't quite there yet in terms of being able to measure how healthy soil sequesters carbon. But I think that's a really interesting area for development, and it's an area that really speaks to me in terms of that respecting the land and looking after the land, because it just, so with the types of things we do is we plant wildflowers so that we don't need to spray to the same degree we introduce biodiversity into the vineyards. We have cover crops that feed the soil and in the same time feed our vines. We try to reduce the amount of sprays that we use. So those are all things that are part of regenerative viticulture, and they're really important.
Hey, Karen.
Yeah.
So we were talking about regenerative agriculture yesterday, and I'd really love to talk about that and what we're doing in that space as well in the research area. But I'm just mindful of Alice needing to get onto the hearing.
I was just going to say that. Yeah. I was just looking at the time. I'm going to come back to you, Karen, and I do have questions, but I know Alice needs to run. So I just want to make sure that we hear her story because it's really inspiring.
No problem.
Thank you so much, Karen. We'll come back to you. Alice, I'm so pleased to have you. When we say that when we look at a bottle of wine, we think that people are not willing to pay the extra dollar, if the right message is behind, which is not true. We know that today, 42% of the consumers are millennials. And it's been proven that if you know how to communicate to them, they are willing to pay a few more dollars if they know that the product is made in a sustainable and also having the environment, in mind when creating that product. And for you, you've started 362. You were 25 years old with that incredible vision and also determination to be carbon neutral. And I've looked at what you've done, and I'm so inspired. And I think it's also inspiring for the newer generation because the planet will be in the hand of your generation and the next one to come. So if you could share with us what you've been doing and achieve what you've done in terms of being carbon neutral.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. It's been a big journey and it's been a tough one simply because of my size. We've really had to think outside the square because we're not a solution, or going carbon neutral is much harder we don't have the economies of scale, we don't have the resources, we don't have the people, we don't have the capital behind us. So we've had to start from the ground roots. And when I first produced my wine, one thing coming from a viticulture and winemaking background is the culture of sustainability within our vineyards and wineries. It's immense. Everywhere you go, everyone's cutting water, everyone's looking at reducing their passes through their vineyards. But that didn't translate all the way through marketing. And it was interesting what you just said, Karen. I think that, are our sustainability accreditations true? Well, it's interesting because all the way through marketing, we don't have that same degree of sustainability. We're still covering or taping up our boxes with sellotape. We have plastic invoice slips whacked on top of our sustainable product. We have heavy glass bottles, another one that we've touched on, with a misconception that heavier glass translates into more expensive, higher quality wines. We've got to turn that all on its head. It's very hard to do that as a little producer. But I think in my view, in terms of going carbon neutral and producing wines more sustainably, it's a three-pronged solution. It starts with waste, and that goes back to our marketing. We need to have glass that can be recycled. We need to stop putting plastic on our packaging, makes it more recyclable. We need to stop wasting our water, wasting our diesel. We just need to stop waste everywhere. It's such a precious world, and we need to start nourishing the resources that we have at hand. And so we can be proud of those decisions in years to come. Waste extends out into the winery where we've got all of our grape marc. What do we do with that? Well, that brings me on to point number 2, and Karen also touched on this, is soil. I think that everyone can agree that soil has a major influence in the style and character of our wines, but it goes beyond that. I think if there's one needle which will change climate change it's nourishing our soils. And at the moment, a lot of them are degraded. So what can we do in our businesses to nourish and look after soil? Because soil that is healthy holds much more carbon. And they're doing things like stopping cultivation. It's planting our cover crops. It's putting our grape marc as a carbon source back into our vineyards. We need to start maximising the way and our value of our soil. And it's also people. And I think everyone has touched about how important people and strategic long thinking is. Now, there's a question about, are we terrified or excited about the next 10 years with the whole, going carbon neutral? I'm excited, and the reason I think I'm very excited is because we've got leaders within our sector that are driving that change. We walked into that with legislation on the front foot within the wine industry, and I think that's largely credit to our head of sustainability here at New Zealand Winegrowers, Dr. Ed Massey. Now we've got a bit of a gap to close. We've got a lot of smaller producers that are not fully sustainable wine growers certified yet. He's working relentlessly hard to sew up that gap. But one thing that was done late last year, and I was grateful to be that millennial that joined the panel to refresh our sustainability wine growers scorecards. So we're now moving, the thing with sustainable wine growers, which I think is really admirable, is it's voluntary. It's not forced upon us. I think that is something that needs to be taken into consideration, that this as a sustainability accreditation is unmatched from anything else in the world. And I'm quite proud of to be a Kiwi and know that that's what we've got to work with within our industry. But it's taking a whole new level in the respect that we have now moved all of our scorecards, which is how we monitor all of our data in the vineyards and wineries, is all quantitative metrics. So it's very hard to go climate positive or carbon neutral unless you know what those numbers look like. Now, this is being rolled out within the entire sector. So from November this year, we will be expected to record the litres of diesel, the amount of litres of water per vine, how much litres of water have been used in the winery, the kilowatts of power in our wineries. Now, when we start capturing that data, it makes everything an equal playing field, irrespective of your site. So Titulaer are coming in to assist with some of the carbon calculations. So that was a big chunk of work that has gone on in both the vineyard and winery, which will excel. Now, if we can sew up that gap and make sure that every wine producer in New Zealand is sustainable wine growers accredited, I don't think that it's actually overly, going carbon neutral is going to be that difficult. I'm quite convinced that we could be carbon neutral within the next 10 years quite easily.
Alice, I know that you're going to have to leave shortly, but I want to make sure you talk about to us about Carbon Click, because I think that one of the things we'll talk about, that I'm going to talk about with this panel, is how to reach consumer, how to communicate better. They're still lost within all of that. I think you've done an amazing job with Carbon Click. So can you share with us what you've done with this and how you're reaching consumers?
Yeah. So over lockdown, I became the first wine producer in New Zealand to introduce carbon or partner with Carbon Click. They're a technology company based here in New Zealand that have a green click at the shopping cart. So when customers go onto buy my wine, they can choose whether or not they want to pay an extra $2 to offset their carbon footprint, knowing that the transportation of getting wine to customers is amongst some of the highest. It's a very, very different approach to the Toitū accreditation that we also have here in New Zealand, in the respect that it's only 80% accurate. The Toitū is between 90 and 95, but we offset 200% of our footprint. and we drop the carbon neutral term and replace it with carbon positive due to the high probability that we're offsetting more than what we actually produce. So what I have noticed, and this is still very, very early days, still not 1 year that we've rolled this technology out, but my younger customers are far more mindful about doing, if I have to do a market segmentation with my customers and who are using the carbon click, it is the younger ones, definitely.
And I think it's amazing because it's $2 more a bottle, right? $1 to $2. And I think this is an important thing because it's not minor, right? Yet people are willing to do it, because when I was talking to you, you were telling me that almost everyone who goes and buy, they actually do it because it's voluntary, correct? So,
yeah, but it depends on who's buying. And at the time over lockdown, there was a lot of younger customers, weirdly enough. I don't know whether it's just because they knew who I was or what, but they were the ones that were offsetting. And even now, you know, like I'm getting older customers, they're not offsetting. So I think that this is a message that needs to be communicated, and a culture change that needs to come from higher up, because those more the older customers, they come with an expectation that it's my responsibility to reduce my carbon footprint.
Yeah.
And potentially that's the solution too. But it does bring about an awareness that going carbon neutral is not just a producer's responsibility, it's also the customer's too.
Thank you. Really inspiring. And I know that we're going to we've put the link if you want to go and check it out, carbonclick.com. You can also go to Alice's website. And I think it's important information for us. Like I was saying, I do feel that the future is within the younger generation who are willing to pay a few dollars more. And I think, you know, when we go to a liquor board and we try to find a bottle of wine, I always say to wine people, just imagine you're going, if you don't know art, if you don't know music, go to a music store and try to pick one CD. It's impossible. You're overwhelmed. So now you have to think about, okay, which wine is more sensible for the environment, for carbon? It's impossible, right? So I do feel that we all really need to work together to find a way to communicate better about easily. Not, you know, because yes, the geek will go to the website and it's great and it needs to be there, but I think we need to educate sommelier, we need to educate people at the store so that it can go to the consumer, and that's the challenge. I know you have to leave, Alice, but before we take the question, I would like to finish with one question for you all, my panel, before I take we have a lot of questions from the attendees, and I do want to get to them. But starting with Alice, I would like you to give one advice for people listening and they do want to make a difference and they don't know where to start. You talk from a producer point of view, but what can you share with the consumer, with the sommelier that are listening? We have people from the trade from all aspects. One thing they can take away with them today to say, okay, I'm going to at least do this. Alice?
Lower weight wine bottles matter, and they play a big part in our climate reduction strategy, and they shouldn't be misconstrued for lower quality.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know you have to run. Thank you for being part of the discussion.
Yeah, sorry, I need to go. See ya.
Thank you.
Hi, Alice.
Rachel?
For consumers and people who are looking for products to surround themselves with, I think you need to work out what's important to you as the consumer or as a sommelier, and then you look for companies to fill that gap. And so the starting point for all of that is it a great product? But behind that, you know, what impression do you have of them? What do they stand for? Are they good, bad, otherwise important? Do you have a values alignment with the company that you're choosing to support? Because, you know, the power of consumption comes from consumers, and so finding companies that you want to support with that power.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Going back to Alice's point about, you know, be bold, you know, as a consumer, select a lower weight glass bottle. You know, I think that's really important, and you can see with New Zealand as a wine industry being really pioneering in the widespread adoption of screw cap. over 20 years ago, 98% of all our wines are in screw cap, and the wine quality has never been better. So we have shown that we can be brave, and I would love to see us as a wine producing country really pioneering in that area. But I just encourage you all just to keep tuning into nzwine.com. We really take a thought leadership position in this whole area of sustainability and climate change adaptation and mitigation. We're doing incredible research in this area. We've touched on what we're doing in the area of soil health and regenerative agriculture, and that being such an amazing carbon sink for the world, and how we can help our growers adapt in the vineyards to have lower inputs, etc. So keep tuning into nzwine.com. And we're continuing to learn on this really, really important journey for the world.
Thank you. Karen?
I agree with what Alice said about the lower weight wine bottles in Charlotte, but I really liked Rachel's answer about the values alignment. And I think that's an approach that we're taking with our suppliers, with our consumers, having that values alignment and thinking when people buy a product, thinking about the product life cycle, were people treated well when that product was produced? Was the environment treated well when that product was produced? And once I finish consuming that product, what can I do with it in terms of recycling? Is it in a package that I can recycle easily? So it's that whole, just have a step back and think about the whole product life cycle when you're buying a product, and the values alignment, I think, making sure that it's something that you're comfortable with the values and that they align with your own.
Thank you. And I have one thing to say for people listening. I do think that we all have a role, and I'm going to speak to sommelier because I think that the consumer listen to you. We've seen movement in the world. I think of the natural wine. I think of biodynamic. The consumer did not hear about it overnight. It came from somewhere. And how do you hear about it? They go to a restaurant, they fall in love with a wine, and they hear a concept, and then they get aware of it. And I think that we have a role in communicating in a way that is, even though it's a very complicated topic, and today, we're only going to surface the topic, but I do think that there's a few things that we can do in sharing that knowledge, starting with making the right decision when you do the wine list. And I always say that if the bottle is heavy, don't buy it. And Charlotte was mentioning, transportation and packaging, right? They say that transport and packaging, packaging and bottling is responsible for 78% in average of the carbon footprint of a bottle. So I'm sorry, but I don't care if you're biodynamic and if you have the whole list. If I pick up your bottle of wine and it weighs a kilo, and you're sending it by plane or by truck, I don't want to buy it. I don't, because there's so many other wines out there I can choose that are good, that will at least care for transportation and bottle weight, because that is the biggest piece of the carbon footprint. With that, we have an interesting discussion, question here. So Jenny, she asked, I'm wondering if you can share more about the movement to make shipping more sustainable. What is it called and how can you learn more? So who wants to answer to that question?
I'll just read from the infographic that I keep referring to, because it encompasses it so well. It just says the bulk of emissions associated with the global food and beverage trade is associated with road transport within countries rather than cross-border shipments. And in fact, consumers driving their private vehicles to the store to buy wine has been found to be one of the biggest contributors of greenhouse gases on a per unit basis. So that's really interesting. And New Zealand wine is largely shipped by sea to our international markets, which is 5 times as efficient as road transport. But I know, Karen, you'll be able to add much more to that answer, given the 10 years of measurements that you have in that area that you were talking about.
I can. I'm just trying to see if I can find the reference to, there is a maritime convention that New Zealand has signed up to make shipping more transparent. And I'll just see if I can find a reference to that one. But that is actually, that is about working together across that maritime industry to make ships more carbon efficient. So apologies, I was just trying to find that while you were talking, Charlotte.
It's a very complicated topic, and I have a conference in Montreal that takes on every 2 years, and it's called Tasting Climate Change. And in the last conference, we actually had someone from Hillebrand who came and talked to us for an hour about shipping and where the CO2 comes from, the type of gas they use, the route they take. And it's funny because when I decided to put that person as a person on its own for an hour, I thought, oh my God, like, people are coming here to hear about viticulture and wine, and there I am putting an hour long on transportation. And I have to say, still today, when I meet people who come to that conference, they still talk about that because they had no idea the role of transportation and the carbon emissions. So if you want to go to tastingclimatechange.com, there's an hour-long seminar on transportation that was done by Hillebrand, talking about all type of fuels, the type of container, the difference if you ship by bottle or by flexi tank. So it's really interesting topic, and it's quite complex actually. We have another question. So I know that Charlotte, you had the full food mile, I think, in your hand. So someone is asking to go over a little bit more of that. What is food mile? Can you maybe share a bit more detail about that?
Okay, I feel like I'm reading the Bible at church, but so on the emissions thing, at the very top, we just put the key areas of the discussion in little boxes. Food miles only consider emissions associated with a single component of the complex value chain that produces wine and delivers it in the market. The distance it travels from the point of origin to the point of consumption. Despite this fact, and as I said earlier, it's at times mistakenly used interchangeably with the concept of sustainability. And as Karen said, it's much better to look at the life cycle approach of a product. So you're going right from when the vine was a graft, putting it in the ground and producing it all through to getting into the bottle. So that's the way that we get a more complete picture. So yeah, our goal to become net carbon zero before 2050, in line with the Paris Agreement, is our goal on that. So yes, just when you think food miles, just think that it was, I guess, bandied around. I mean, when I lived in the UK back in 2010, it was a very popular concept back then, and it's just really focusing on one very small part of the production life cycle.
And Rachel, I have a question for you. Thanks, Charlotte. Rachel, I know that you've been talking about sustainability in terms of people, but as a company, when you look at the decision of the government, I'm just curious to hear from your point of view in terms of, are you working closely with New Zealand wine growers? Like, did you feel overwhelmed, or were you already tracking your carbon footprint by the time this came out? Like, where were you at with that?
Well, we're a SWNZ member as well, so we've always been a part of the program. And then there was a period where there was a SWNZ Plus bolt on, and so we participated in this, the higher level of SWNZ. So we've always participated in that program. But then in parallel, I guess that we have our own body of work that encompasses the whole group. So we can't just focus on vineyards and wine. We've got to focus on water and factories, and every manner of activity that we undertake has to come into this space. And we have like a measure. So we have an endeavour to be solid waste free by 2028. We have the same sort of carbon reduction and then elimination targets that New Zealand wine growers and the government is pushing towards. So, and the soil regeneration and so forth. So there's a myriad of different moving parts that we are aiming at. Some of them are completely in line with New Zealand wine growers, and some of them go above and below and around and in front of. I think that New Zealand wine growers give such good direction, and then from that's your motivation to do more. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, New Zealand wine growers are an industry organisation, and as such can provide a phenomenal amount of support and information. But then the companies have to pick that up and run with it, and not just sprint, because it's really an issue that we can't take our time with. We have to move with urgency.
And did you find that the whole company feels the emergency, or you kind of have to be a cheerleader to make sure that everyone is really on board, because it's something new, right?
It's a really good question, actually, because when we started this, our impression was How are we going to mobilize people? Because the biggest challenge in all of this is the cultural shift within an organization to have everyone start thinking in this way. The reality is that all of our team who are on water, in orchard, on vineyards, they're the ones who are saying, like, come on, let's go. We're on the earth, we're on the ground, we're on the water every single day. So you can make the rules, you can set up the systems and processes, but like, we're ready, let's go. So actually the push and the motivation and the impetus is coming from everywhere, which is really, really encouraging. And oftentimes you have to keep up with your own team.
And I just also wanted to make a point, echoing on from Alice and all of us, that, you know, I'm really proud of what we have achieved as an industry. And at New Zealand Winegrowers, in our marketing team, part of our function is to help people of the world understand our wines. So we conduct educational events, we conduct tasting events. This is in a pre-COVID world where pivoting digitally right now, but in order to be able to participate in our marketing activities overseas, we're so proud of our sustainability credentials that we've achieved, that you need to have a sustainability accreditation, whether it be Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand, whether it be BioGrow, whether it be Demeter, what have you, but to demonstrate your commitment that you're on the sustainability journey with the industry. So that's been an important part of our thought leadership play in the area of sustainability.
Great. Thank you so much, ladies. I think this is all the questions we had. I know this is a wide and complex topic. We just touched the surface, but I was so glad to be able to do it with you. And with you four, but also with New Zealand, because really I do think it's a country that people should look to for so many reasons when it comes to sustainability in all forms of what it means. And also now with the commitment to be carbon zero by 2050, I do hope that other countries go to you, you know, because you were talking about how everyone works together in New Zealand to really get there, and you do feel that partnership. And I do hope that other wine region go to you and maybe ask advice to get there as well, because it is a very inspiring story. Thank you so much, everyone who were there today. I do hope that you left with a few insights, and I hope that you left also with me with inspired to do a few things in your life that will make a difference, because I do think that it's one gesture at a time. And the more we talk about it with our friends, with customers, with everyone, the more chance we actually have to make a change. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks to Femmes du Vin for making this a platform. Thank you for New Zealand Winegrowers, and I hope to see you again soon.